now to my guest in studio. Joining me is Roman Catholic Diocese of Providence Bishop Richard Henning. About 6 months in. Nice to have you in, Bishop. This is your first visit to 10 News Conference, although you and I met on day one when you came in.
Yeah, about a year ago.
Yeah,
just about this time.
We're supposed to separate religion from politics. It doesn't always work out as neatly as that. Now, you were listening here. We now have 4 Democrats in Congress. All 4 are pro-choice, strongly pro-choice. Your thoughts on that? Because your predecessor, Bishop Tobin, he had his own way of dealing with liberal Democrats in Congress. What are your thoughts on that, the delegation?
Well, I think that I like Bishop Tobin. I believe in the sanctity of human life. In fact, I would say I'm pretty proud, actually, of Catholic teaching when it comes to the sanctity of human life in the womb, in a hospital bed, among the poor, wherever it is. I think there's a kind of consistency to Catholic teaching and practice that I would love to see that, better understood and better received by our political leadership. The language that's often used is of choice. I would love to see women in Rhode Island have a full choice and be supported when they want to make the choice for life. I think it's fair to say that most people would not welcome that choice. I think that this is something we want to try to avoid. Catholic teaching calls upon us to recognize at every human life is sacred. Pope Francis has certainly reiterated that over and over again. So that's my passionate belief. I know that most Rhode Islanders don't share that belief. Right. But maybe there's common ground in finding ways to help women to make a choice for life.
Now, you're 6 months in, so you're still in the comparison kind of a mode. Well, your predecessor, Bishop Tobin, did this and he did that. So he had no qualms about telling some members of Congress, listen, don't come for communion. You're not in good standing with the faith. And he even told me a couple of interviews ago that if President Biden came to town and happened to be here on a Sunday, wanted to come to Mass at the cathedral, he'd tell him no. So where do you stand on telling some of the members of the delegation they're out of step with your views as far as the Catholics are concerned? I believe, I want to step out of turn. We have Catholic members in our delegation. So where do you stand with them, and as far as telling them you're out of step, maybe don't come for communion? And what would you do if the president came in on a weekend, wanted to go to your cathedral?
Well, thanks for leading with those questions.
Fair is fair, right?
I understand.
We're here to do the Lord's business.
I think with regard to the decision of whether to come to communion, every Catholic, we're all sinners, right? First, that's where we begin, right? We are sinners in need of the grace of God. So to approach communion is, it's a big deal, to use a non-theological language. This is bringing ourselves into, contact with the living God. And to do so unworthily would be to really place ourselves in harm's way, right? So we want always to be prepared morally and spiritually for that Holy Communion. Generally, if there's someone who is in some way living in a public way that is contrary to Catholic teaching or it would be considered sinful by church teaching, that's not something I would state in public. You don't humiliate or embarrass the person or make the sacrament itself a source of division. You address an individual with regard to their spiritual life. And I believe that was what Bishop Tobin had done, at least the way I heard it. Now, the person may make that public.
I don't think he put a press release out, but somehow it got out and it was clear. He told former Congressman Kennedy. By the way, I believe our delegation is 2-2 with regard to Roman Catholics. The other 2 are members of other religions.
Right. So again, that's more of a private pastoral matter. The other question you're alluding to, I guess, is this question of excommunication, but that's a public act of the Church, and it's very specific. It's actually much misunderstood, I think, in American culture. So I don't really. That's a canonical matter. Again, so these are more kind of personal exhortation realities between a pastor and his and the faithful. But it is a scandal when Catholics do not uphold the sanctity of human life. That is a scandal, and that pains me. I agree for that.
Okay, so, all right, well, scandal's a pretty strong word, but I'm sensing, and just knowing a little bit of the background on you versus your predecessor, that you're not going to tell either of those members of the delegation not to come to church, not to get communion. Am I reading that right?
What I'm saying is that if I have a conversation with any of our political leadership,
Right.
it would be a private pastoral
Okay.
matter. I wouldn't comment on it or announce I was even going to have the meeting. And there are probably Catholics who would like me to do that.
Yes.
But again, these are matters of conscience, and I don't know the person. I don't know their thinking, their mind.
Okay.
I would certainly urge them to reconsider whether they could find it in their hearts to have some sense of compassion or mercy for the most vulnerable among us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what I should be doing with all Catholics. And I also want, I understand most of the voters in this state support those positions. And in some sense, our political leadership is reflecting. So that tells me I have work to do to try to change hearts and convince Catholics why this teaching of the Church is so central and foundational.
So it would be a private meeting between you and the member of Congress. You would certainly convey your feelings on this, which are absolute, pro-life, absolute, following of the Church. But you don't want to share with me now whether or not you would tell them, listen, if you don't agree with me, you're out of step and you're not really welcome for communion.
Well, if
You want to leave off at that? Or?
if I tell you the outcome of the meeting, I'm not really listening to the person.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Well, I'm following it. Yes, of course, as a reporter, I'd like a more definitive answer, but that's all right. Matters of religion are never, never definitive.
I mean, I don't know if someone can be baptized a Catholic. I don't know that an individual is going to church necessarily without talking to them.
Okay.
I don't know whether they're taking communion. I think it would be wrong of me to tell you in advance what I've already determined when I have not even spoken with or listened to the individual.
Fair enough. Does that go for the president too? Because Bishop Tobin told me that if President Biden were to be here on a weekend and wanted to come to his cathedral for Mass, he would not welcome him. He would say, you're welcome to sit, but don't take communion. Is that a similar thinking on your part, or do you not want to,
Yeah.
you know?
I'm not sure the president would make an appointment to
You
see
never
me.
know. You never know.
You never know. But I think given the very public stances that he's taken, he is publicly contradicting the Church's commitment to life. And that's a very serious matter that would need discussion. I think it would be certainly confusing to the faithful if he were to very publicly come and attend Mass and receive Holy Communion under those circumstances.
He does that now, and his bishop in his home diocese is okay with it, and I know that bishops from diocese to diocese have a lot of say in how they want to run your diocese.
Right.
All right, let's move on to larger things. You've been here 6 months. You've had, I don't know if you've visited every church. There are a lot of them, and some of them are really beautiful, and some of them have beautiful people, and some of the priests are doing God's work. They really are. What's your assessment of what you've seen so far in Rhode Island?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing to say is I love Rhode Island. I've been able to travel all around. I haven't been to every single parish. I've been to, I guess, about a little more than half. So probably about 65 parishes in one form or another.
Yeah.
And I've been to some of them multiple times, different events, confirmation. Wherever I go, people have been wonderful. It's a great state. There's a real neighborliness that I'm experiencing. I've been most impressed by the way in which people come together as a community, reach out to others. There's certainly wealth in Rhode Island, but I wouldn't call it a wealthy state. But there is a wealth of compassion and generosity for people, for their neighbors. I was a couple weeks ago at the statewide gathering of the St. Vincent de Paul Society. Mm-hmm. These are folks that volunteer their time. You know, they put in a hard day of work, and then they spend their evenings and weekends visiting with people that are struggling, finding ways to help them. That's the kind of thing that I've really been experiencing as I go from parish to parish, is that goodness, that generosity, and the hospitality. Right. So I've been teasing the parishioners. You know, Rhode Island's official motto is a beautiful one. It's a Christian one. It's from the Bible, hope.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I think the unofficial one's you got to eat.
Yeah.
So everywhere I go, there's always these great receptions, just real generosity. But we also face real challenges, and that's not true only in Rhode Island. That's true of the church in lots of parts of the United States. Too many of our fellow Catholics have drifted away or walked away.
That's a good point for us to take a break, because when we come back, we'll talk about these challenges and one of the most serious ones that you face and how you have a plan to turn them around.
Sure.
We'll be right back with the Bishop.
Thank you for turning to 10, your news leader. 10 News Conference with Gene Valicenti continues right now.
As a diocesan bishop, it will be my duty really to, again, down the road, to pray and to exercise leadership and to do so in accord with my conscience and in accord with the teaching of the Church.
Welcome back. That's Bishop Henning. He's with me in studio, the new leader of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Providence. And we are, I believe, at one point at least, we were the most Catholic of states per capita. And yet we have a lot of problems in our diocese, as well as other dioceses across the country. Number one issue for you is what? We have to fix what?
Yeah, I think there's a constellation, so I don't know if there's any one, but the driver really is the change in the culture. You know, the Church lives and breathes in a culture, and the culture in which we live has become far more secular, and particularly in Rhode Island, where the Church organized itself by immigrant cultures that have now more or less integrated, become part of the more dominant secular culture. That's had effects on Catholic life in Rhode Island. So we have to learn to live with fewer resources, but you know, we've done that before, we can do it again. We have to learn to live you know, with less kind of worldly influence. You were asking me earlier about political life. I don't know that at this point in history the Bishop of Providence can command what happens in the State House, maybe even ever did, but he certainly would have had more influence there in past generations, although that too can be a trap for the Church. We're not meant to be that kind of worldly organization. So one of my key concerns is the question of evangelization. And we have to address under that umbrella lots of very particular things. You alluded earlier to the beautiful churches. They're magnificent, but they cost a lot to maintain. You need parishioners. You need people that will commit themselves to the community. We have those people. They're good people. But too many of our fellow Catholics have drifted away. So my hope and prayer would be that we can convince some of them to come back to the practice of the faith, to kind of bring them really back to the grace of Jesus Christ. You know, as I go around Rhode Island, one of the things I have sensed, again, not unique to us, there's a kind of sense out there of generalized anxiety, a feeling like there's just something not right with the world. And I think there's a connection between the decline of practice of the faith and that sense of anxiety, rising rates of mental illness, the conflicts that occur in our culture. I think Jesus Christ is in fact the healing response of God to human sin and suffering. And so my hope would be to bring as many Catholics as possible back to that truth of the Lord's grace.
Well, it is one of the most Catholics of states per capita, and yet you said you have more people are out of step with the Church's teaching on abortion. Most people would put themselves down as pro-choice versus pro-life. And young people aren't getting married in the Church, a fraction of what it used to be. And we know that the sex scandal took a real toll on the Church. So let's lay it out. Where's the repair have to be made? How do you get people back in? If the young people aren't coming, they don't want to get married, they've been beaten up by this sex scandal for years and years in the headlines. This is serious work to be done here to save the Church.
Absolutely. Well, Jesus saves the Church.
By the way, I wouldn't be so bold as to say, as to wonder whether the Church will survive. That's a larger issue. But you know what I'm getting at. Practically, you've got some work to do.
Yeah. Well, I think also if you look at the last 2,000 years, there have been lots of challenges, lots of moments when people declared the Church over. It's not over because it belongs to God. And even as we are experiencing institutional challenges here, there are other parts of the world where the Church is thriving and growing, and that's always been the case. So I you know, whatever happens today, Jesus is Lord. I have to face a lot of challenges, but that truth is foundational for me. Whatever happens today, the gospel's true. Whatever happens today, Eucharist is real. That's where I start my day. And of course, Our Lady of Providence, I entrust myself to the mantle of Mother Mary. So that's where it starts. It's not an institutional problem first and foremost. It's a question of the heart. The family is so critical to the life of the Catholic Church, and the family is in distress in our culture in so many ways. And I'm not blaming anyone, it's the truth. Children are not finding them, as large numbers of children, not being raised in stable families. This is part of why we're struggling to evangelize. The Catholic Church has all kinds of programs, Catholic schools, religious education, none of which can really accomplish anything without good, faithful Catholic parents, right? So a key component here is how do we reinforce, strengthen family life within our communities so that the next generation is growing rather than shrinking.
Right.
But I'm very concerned about young people, I agree, particularly young adults. That's why even on those other hot button issues you raised, I have to take a more humble approach here. People are not receiving the teaching that I believe passionately and I think is part of what God intends for human beings. I have to do some hard work of trying to convince them again.
Mm-hmm. Well, enrollment is up at Catholic school.
It
that
is.
may be a positive. We'll talk about that right after this break. We'll be back
Yeah.
with Bishop Henning for our final segment. Welcome back. One more segment with our guest, Bishop Henning from the Roman Catholic Diocese of Providence. You know, the good news is, the good news is in the good book, but apart from that, Catholic school enrollment is up.
Yeah.
So you do have a chance at maybe reaching a new generation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's up for a lot of different reasons, but in your view, it's up because?
I think Catholic schools across the country, we navigated the challenge of COVID well, and parents noticed. So we did not lose ground. Our students actually continue to rise in their testing, whereas much of the country saw a pretty significant dip. And I think our culture of our schools, so the schools in Rhode Island tend to be small, so that allows us to draw parents into the work of education. So in a Catholic school setting, the parents are the first formators of the child. So they always have a seat at the table. Their voice will always be heard. And I think parents want that. They want to be involved in very challenging days in the curriculum, in the way the school day is arranged, certainly in safety issues. So I think parents are seeing that difference. We also have a kind of freedom in Catholic school, which is, for obvious reasons, not possible in a public school. We can address those questions of the heart and quite forcefully. And again, you see the difference in the schools.
Well, the schools are struggling, the school committees are struggling with banned books, and people are fighting over that, and there's all kinds of social issues that have made their way into the school. You avoid all of that with the Catholic education. So if you're looking for a more traditional, conservative education, you're going to get it at the Catholic school.
Yeah, although there's a real variety in the schools that we have. There's a new school, a new high school, Chesterton Academy, which would be sort of classical education. We have other, more traditional models of Catholic education, a very powerful one, the De La Salle model of the Christian Brothers. So there's a kind of variety to be found even within the Catholic Church. We're not monolithic. We are quite culturally diverse. So there's all kinds of different educational models that parents choose.
So enrollment is up in the Catholic schools. Enrollment as far as people wanting to become priests, though, across the country, it's down. It's way down in some spots. Where do you assess where you stand? Are you better than some other dioceses?
So if you look at across the country, there'd be other dioceses that are much better than Rhode Island's numbers per capita. But in New England, we actually are doing better than most, and compared with the New York area where I come from originally, much better. So we've got really good candidates, but yes, the number is smaller. We probably will kind of stabilize soon in terms of the retirements of those prior big classes and the smaller incoming. But we are going to have to be a smaller and leaner church, but hopefully that will also mean a more zealous and committed to mission church. That would be that's certainly my hope and goal.
You make news whenever you close a parish or you consolidate parishes. Often those left at those parishes don't like that.
Sure.
It's like closing someone's home. Do
no, it is.
you envision some tough decisions have to be made there with regard to the number of churches you have?
I hope Rhode Island Catholics know I've been honest from the beginning about that.
Yeah.
We have to make some hard choices, but the choices are mission focused, right? So the issue here is that we've got to build parishes that are alive and achieving that mission. And this is part of what the Holy Father is calling us to. This is part of why he's called the Synod. He wants the church to become a church in mission, and not a church that simply preserves buildings. We're not a museum. This is meant to be a living reality, a mission that announces Jesus Christ to the world. So to do that, we have to make hard choices about buildings, for example. There's whole hosts of buildings built in this state for a different age.
Right.
We have to look at how they serve and whether there's better ways they can serve. So that's one of my key interests. The University of Notre Dame just started a program to re-envision the use of church buildings for new missions, and not all of them necessarily directly linked to the church. So that's a key interest of mine, is what can we do about that. But yes, Rhode Islanders, we love our neighborhoods, we love our villages, and we love our churches. They are home to people, so it's not easy. I know that that'll be challenging. I'm going to have to ask people to kind of walk with me in this, but I have to listen to them, and that's part of what I've started to do.
All right. With just about a minute left, you're 6 months in, and I remember people, the reporters want to know, is he less conservative than Tobin was? You were appointed by this Pope, who is seen to be less conservative than his predecessors. You're just back from the Baltimore gathering. So sum it up for us. You're going to be different than Bishop Tobin. In what ways?
I think with Bishop Tobin and he and I are, in terms of substance, the same.
Yeah.
I have great admiration for Bishop Tobin. My style is different just because I'm a different person. It's the nature of the beast.
Right.
But I don't like that language. I think we have to get past that language of liberal and conservative. It doesn't really fit in the Catholic Church. Even for Bishop Tobin, if you really look at his history, we have one of the largest...
I've got to hold it there, but
yeah, sorry.
I wish I didn't run out of time, but we could have Mass again next week. We'll come back, and you come on my radio show.
Great, I'd love that.
Welcome to Rhode Island, by the way.
Thank you.
Nice to have you on.
Thank you, it's good to be with you.
All right, that's Bishop Henning. That's 10 News Conference, your #1 longest running political show in Southern New England. Watch all of our interviews on turn to10.com, and have a great rest of your weekend.